Hi everybody, hope we're all doing well today. This is Daniel Calfo here. Today we're going to be talking about His Hawaiian Excellency by Nicholas R. Schweitzer. And then with some of the vocabulary here, I'll do my best to pronounce the Hawaiian appropriately, but do forgive me if anything's off as well. Specifically, we're going to follow this agenda here as shown. Starting out with point number 5, we'll go through some of the main characters. Then we'll move on to the summary with those main characters in mind. And then finally, we'll move on to some of the main topics here as their points of consideration. Starting out with the characters, we have Colonel Curtis Iokea. He's who is referred to as His Hawaiian Excellency in the title of the book. And he's essentially a government diplomat who provides service to both the monarchy as well as the later republic in an official capacity. But for the purpose of the book, he's essentially just how the world is presented. He's the eyes that we see the novel through. Moving on to Henry Poor, he's Iokea's professional aide, companion, and friend. He's not necessarily developed as a character that much, and neither is Iokea. They're essentially just lenses to look through and see the events with. Moving on, we have Queen Liliuokalani, the sovereign leader of the Hawaiian monarchy after the death of Kalakaua in 1891. Then we have the Boston, which is a U.S. warship, and that's important because that's basically the military force that the leaders of the coup use to make possible the coup itself. But prior to that, let's go back for a second. We have the Committee of Safety. This is a radical political group, and they are the ones that enact the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy itself. Moving down the list, we have Henry Cooper, William C. Wilder, and William Owen Smith. These are some of a group of Haole businessmen, lawyers, and otherwise government actors that encouraged the overthrow of the monarchy and established the Hawaiian Republic. Next, we have Sanford Dole, and he's actually a justice of the Supreme Court of the Kingdom of Hawaii. He was initially opposed to the overthrow of the monarchy, but eventually he changes his mind and actually ends up becoming president of the Provisional Government of Hawaii prior to the official annexation later in 1898. There are, of course, a lot more characters. There are actually dozens and dozens more, but these are really the most important ones, and essentially the only ones that really matter to the story. Moving on to the summary. In the beginning, we're introduced to one of the main characters, Iokea, where he's in attendance of the funeral of Queen Liliuokalani. Almost immediately, however, the book shifts into a flashback that gives the perspective of Iokea some years prior, when he and Henry have just arrived in Moscow for the coronation of Alexander III. Now, the first, I think it's 150 or so pages of the book. This is devoted to both Iokea's and Henry's travel around Europe. And in terms of plot and event, nothing really much happens here. Henry and Iokea, they essentially just act in a diplomatic capacity, and they go around Russia from Moscow, St. Petersburg, and then a few other places, educating the different people they encounter on the Hawaiian culture. And the point here is really just to establish that at the time, the Hawaiian nation was recognized as a sovereign entity, and it was treated as such. And that's about all that happens there. It's too lengthy to get into otherwise. So we'll need to skip to when Henry Poor and Iokea returned to Hawaii. Um, and that is, pardon me, that's essentially moving back to the events of January 14th through the 17th, 1893, where it suggested that the overthrow and the other major mechanisms for the later 1898 annexation of Hawaii take place. Specifically, the book shifts to a legislative hearing where Queen Liliuokalani attacks what is referred to as the Bayonet Constitution. Now, the Bayonet Constitution was the current constitution in the Hawaiian monarchy up to that point, but it yielded an undue amount of power to haole businessmen and other foreign interests. So now Liliuokalani, in an act of repealing that constitution and introducing a new or amended constitution, is trying to restore power to the native Hawaiians in the Hawaiian monarchy. However, a group of haole businessmen are aware that the queen is trying to restore power to both herself and her people, and actively try to fight against her by means of what's referred to as the Annexation Club. This develops into what is referred to as the Committee for Safety. And the Committee for Safety argues that since the Queen is acting to introduce a new constitution without the support of the legislature, she is acting as a revolutionary which threatens the public peace. And in order to prevent this from happening, and really in order to make possible what is going to be the military coup, the club will enlist the aid of American soldiers on the nearby Boston warship to enact a kind of martial law. So the soldiers, on behalf of the Committee for Safety, disembark from the Boston, and they take position to surround the Iolani Palace grounds. Now, specifically on January 17th, 1893, this is when the coup happens, where Dole and other members of the Committee for Safety march to the government building of the Ali'i Olani Hale and read their declaration of overthrow. Supported by a number of armed men at their side, they gain control of the various governmental departments at the Hale and declare martial law for Oahu, as well as suspend the right to habeas corpus. Nearby at Iolani Palace, Iokea is in audience with the Queen, and then the debate arises as to whether fight Dole and the others who instituted the coup or to yield authority. Now, in hoping to avert conflict, violent conflict, the Queen relinquishes her authority and recognizes the authority of the new provincial Hawaiian government. Sometime in the future, not stated explicitly when, but I believe Iokea is reflecting once more and reveals that he has become an aide to the new Hawaiian Republic in the wake of both the monarchy and the Queen Liliuokalani's death herself. Once the monarchy has been dissolved, Iokea found himself without a job and therefore took to working for the new Hawaiian Republic that has resulted out of the coup. Iokea reflects on how he had wished to fight the coup, and now he feels guilty because of it. He further reflects on how the Republic of the Hawaii is kind of a sham at that point, because it's essentially just a prop set up for the eventual annexation into the United States. At this point, Iokea continues to meet with Queen Victoria of England, where she asks him about his previous global travels, and then perhaps the most important question in the book, she asks Iokea if the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy was necessary. Here, Iokea stammers and is unable to answer. He seems to want to answer that the overthrow was not necessary, but perhaps fears the repercussions of what would essentially be betraying his new government. Iokea reflects on Liliuokalani herself and how she was imprisoned in her own palace, how additionally, as late as 1897, she traveled to Washington, D.C. to plead with the U.S. government, but to no avail. This is essentially where the book ends, and in conclusion, Iokea reflects on how he hopes that the spirit of the native Hawaiians can remain intact despite much of their land as well as their government having been stolen from them. 40 years after the annexation, he reflects on the members of the royal family who are still actively participating in the current government and additionally how the U.S. saw Hawaii as a valuable resource both in terms of economic interests as well as strategic military interests. After seeing Henry Poor once again, who has been largely absent in the second half of the book, Iakea comes to a conclusion that can serve as the thesis of the book as well. And that is that if the native Hawaiian spirit can remain intact, and if the Hawaiian culture can be nurtured in such ways to thrive, that perhaps someday justice can be regained and power over the Hawaiian Islands can be restored to the Hawaiians themselves. So that's the summary for the most part. The book is just split into two parts, and one of them are parts of travel. Then the second part is the actual events of the annexation itself. Moving on to number 6, main topics. We're going to start with a brief note on colonialism and saying that the book's events in question, colonialism has already been adequately established as an imperial global practice. The question of colonialism as a phenomena is not as relevant as is the way in which colonial practices lead to the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy. Therefore, we focus more on the aspects of colonialism at play in his Hawaiian Excellency rather than colonialism as a topic or theme itself. So topic number 1, we'll call it Lili Ukalane's predicament. And this is essentially saying that while the statement that the Hawaiian monarchy was overthrown is a simple one, its causes and reasonings are far more complex. In one camp, we have the Hawaiian monarchy that primarily represents the native Hawaiian population and their interests as a sovereign nation. Hawaii is recognized globally as an entity unto itself. It may have economic agreements with governments such as US and England, but it is not necessarily beholden to anybody in the sense that it's its own sovereign nation. However, the government of the Hawaiian monarchy has become increasingly subject to infiltration by haole businessmen and government actors who do not necessarily see Hawaiian sovereignty as of vital importance. Rather, the haoles are more interested in exercising their own power both in terms of economic interests as well as religious interests that have to do with Calvinism and notions of manifest destiny, specifically in terms of American expansion. Hawaii is proving to be an excellent resource and one that the haoles believe could be particularly useful flying under the U.S. flag. Sanford Dole is a complex character in that he does not necessarily support the Hawaiian overthrow, but understands that will occur despite his will. So with that, he agrees to support its enactment and become the leader of the new government that will take the monarchy's place. Once the Committee for Safety has established its presence, Lili Ukalani finds herself backed into a corner where she and the palace are surrounded by armed supporters of Dole's efforts, as well as the American warship, the Boston. So now, if Lili Ukalani were to use the Hawaiian military to fight those who were enacting the coup, her attacks against the U.S. military would constitute an act of war and cause severe loss and bloodshed for the Hawaiian people. However, if she surrenders, the monarchy becomes officially dissolved and the native Hawaiians lose power over their kingdom. With this, Lili Ukalani chooses to surrender in order to avoid absolute destruction and bloodshed. And while this surrender is indeed a surrender, the book, I think, suggests that this is actually a very intelligent and tactical decision that Lili Ukalani makes, which is unfortunate, but ultimately the best decision she can in this particular context or scenario. Moving on to number 2, monarchy versus republic. Now, these seem to be the two prime examples of how governments operate in the book in terms of major global powers. Examples here include the monarchy in Russia as well as England and the Republic of the United States in contrast. The main question that arises out of the debate between monarchy and republic is exactly how political power is distributed, whether it rests solely in the hand of a king or a queen, or rather in terms of the governmental body that consists of some kind of parliament or legislature. In the novel, Liliuokalani's monarchy has been invaded by Haole businessmen and other government actors in the example of the Bayonet Constitution, which unfairly limits the power the Queen can express. In an act to regain power more in line with Native Hawaiian interests, the Queen's attempt at providing a new constitution to replace the Bayonet Constitution is categorized as an act of radicalism by the Committee for Safety. A republic, which is the provisional government of Hawaii established by Dole and others, takes its place. Now, the commentary here suggests that, at least in Western eyes, the democratization of power is a good or moral thing, and how even in monarchies like Russia and England, subject to a queen or a king, they're becoming increasingly democratized in an attempt to better distribute their power. However, Dole's republic is essentially a facade. It's not really real so much as it's intended for the purpose of more easily allowing the U.S. to annex Hawaii outright. This brings us to at least one of the questions the book presents, and is a republic more ideal than a monarchy? And the answer, Schweikers suggests, is that it's not necessarily so much about definition or structure so much as it is operation, in that monarchies and republics are possibly both viable forms of government, but their efficacy really depends on how power is distributed within that system and how the checks and balances of said system are able to remedy whatever mistakes the government itself may make. Such as a government making the mistake itself in supporting an illegal coup against a sovereign nation, like we have here. Now, moving on to topic number 3, our final topic, we have control as an expression of power, power as an expression of violence. This is one of the major topics in the book, how violence, or at least the understood potential for violence, it's an expression of power that allows one group to gain control over the other. This is a concept that Schweitzer presents early on in the novel in a couple different examples. The first one being how revolutionaries assassinated Alexander I in Russia. The second one being how French revolutionaries during the French Revolution ended up assassinating or executing the king and queen. His point there is that violence was not necessarily the most ideal or the initial goal of these revolutionary acts, but ended up being what they decided to choose because they felt like they had no other option, or this option suddenly became more ideal or possible at all, really, rather than peaceful protests. But this is all relevant to the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy because violence is the very question that Liliuokalani must navigate in terms of reaching her decision. So her opposition has immediate military control of the surrounding area, and additionally, the implications of that military control are an act of power in and of themselves. If Liliuokalani exerts any violence against the Americans, it would constitute an act of war, which would pave way for the complete invasion and occupation of the Hawaiian Islands. Of course, they're at this point kind of technically already invaded and occupied, but this is just to say perhaps a more severe level of invasion and occupation, something akin to kind of like a martial law, essentially. But on the other hand, if Liliuokalani yields her authority, she saves the immediate lives of her people and allows for possible reclamation of Hawaii in the future. What is interesting to note here is that the Committee for Safety is a relatively small group of people, and they aren't necessarily acting in any official capacity. They're just a group of businessmen who have powerful personal connections, and with those, they're able to gather the support of the soldiers of the Boston warship, as well as a number of other volunteers. The point here being seems to be rather bleak, but it's not necessarily surprising that the expression of violence, or at least the threat of violence, is one definition for power that can be used to control other groups of people and even overthrow entire sovereign nations. Um, the question here that remains is that if Liliuokalani had been more cognizant of military threat, would she have been able to avert the overthrow of her monarchy? In some ways, this does seem possible, but in other kind of more bleak or distressing ways too, it seems that if the Committee for Safety hadn't enacted this coup when they did, that somewhere down the line, it's likely that the U.S. would have just done it themselves, like they had done with um, the entirety of the mainland North America, just about, and then including most recently Alaska, essentially, as well. Um, so that's it for the main points there. Now, in terms of conclusion, Schweitzer does end with some cause for hope. Um, he suggests that the spirit of the native Hawaiians continues to live on despite overthrow and annexation. And it might seem a little corny or kind of a silver lining methodology in terms of ending a novel, but it's actually something we definitely see this in the past few decades in Hawaii. With the resurgence of the Hawaiian language through Hawaiian literacy programs, as well as political demonstration, such as those who are protesting on Mauna Kea. So it may seem like a bit of a consolation here, but there is a core truth to what seems to be Schweitzer's final comment, and that is that the spirit of the native Hawaiians does, in fact, continue to live on. In spite of everything, and it continues to grow as well. So this isn't by any means an excuse or a justification for the illegal overthrow and annexation of Hawaii, but more so a point of meditation that the book makes its conclusion with. So that's all for now. Thank you. We'll be looking forward to answering your questions in the next few days. Until then, take care.